Good evening, everyone, or welcome whenever you're watching this. I'm David Chalmers. I'm one of the trustees of the charity Sunrise Diversity, and we are here to celebrate Northern Devon's Diversity and Pride Festival, which again this year, because of the COVID restrictions, is being held online. But one of the great things is that we're able to have speakers and connect with people from all over the world, and I'm sure this evening is going to be a really sort of memorable event for us. As you know, or those who don't know, Sunrise Diversity, we're about 10 years old. We normally host the Diversity Festival in Barnstable each year, but we also do a lot of work in the local community, celebrating diversity, challenging discrimination, and changing attitudes. We go into schools, colleges, work with individuals. You can find out about us from our Facebook page and our website page. We just recently this year became a registered charity. That's very exciting. We have hopefully lots of sort of things that we're going to be sort of going forward and doing. But as you know, we've been sort of the last year or so, we've been hosting speakers, and I have to say that tonight is one of the really momentous ones for us, in that we have with us this evening Dr. Frank Mugisha. And Frank is the chair of chief executive of SMUG, which is the LGBT organization in Uganda. And so without further ado, welcome, Frank.
Thank you for having me.
No, we're really delighted to have you here. I mean, and just let everyone know, Frank is in Kampala at the moment. What time is it there, Frank?
It is 8 p.m. right now in Uganda.
8 p.m. And just before we went live, we were just talking about the weather in Uganda, which is, I've never been, and it's a country I'd like to visit. It's meant to be lovely there.
Yes, you'd love it. I mean, we have, I think, the best weather around the world. People say, according to one of the British explorers, probably Winston Churchill, someone else, who called Uganda the Pearl of Africa because of having very good weather, but also being very green.
Yeah.
And also, like, the air is very clean, and so it's a very good country.
Yeah, no, I think I've mentioned to you, I was planning to come over a couple of years ago and couldn't get any of the visas to actually go into the parks, but it is one of the countries that I really would like to visit for its beauty, its natural beauty, and the people. I mean, we've known one another now for about 10 years or more, haven't we? But you know, I think that, Frank, you're a good example of how warm and friendly the people are in Uganda.
Yes, Ugandans are known to be very, very friendly and welcoming. If you meet a Ugandan on the street and you ask them for directions, they will not give you the directions, they will take you there. They say, no, hold on. It's okay. I can just go with you. They'll just leave whatever they are doing and come with you and take you where you're going.
That'll be fun. Well,
yeah.
One of the, we met when I was one of the founders of the Kaleidoscope Trust, and that organization was founded to help and support international LGBT rights. It's gone on to do great things, in the 10 years since it was founded. But I remember at the time when we met, just how one of the reasons the Kaleidoscope was sort of founded was because we wanted to raise awareness of what was happening to the LGBT community in Uganda, other countries as well, but Uganda in particular, because of the connections with Britain, knowledge, there's so much sort of, relationship between our two countries. And also because it was felt at the time that, and I think that has changed now, but certainly in the UK, that, our politicians weren't really aware of the sort of the the international human rights abuses that were taking place amongst LGBT communities, and to make that a priority. I'm going to start off with I mean, maybe because I don't know, because we're going to have many people viewing this, and I don't think everyone's going to really know the full situation. But what is it like to be at the moment, to be an LGBT, a gay person in Uganda?
Well, thank you so much, David, for that question. I mean, the question is broad, so I'll try to give you a perspective of different scenarios. So, what is it like to be a gay person in Uganda? First of all, if you are known or perceived to be gay in Uganda, your life is at risk. And what kind of risk are we looking at? So I'm looking at a gay man living their life. They're not open, because majority of gay men in Uganda are not open. They are in the closet. And majority of the gay men in Uganda are also living double lives. Most of them are married to women because society will question a single middle-aged man why they are not married with children here. So majority of gay men will be married. Or if they're not married, they will remain in the closet and they will not disclose to any of their family members or their friends their sexual orientation. So for that kind of gay person, the risk is, one, the atmosphere is being outed in the newspapers. And that happens a lot here, because if you get outed in the newspapers, you could lose your job, you lose your family, lose your friends, and potentially you could become, society won't accept you the way they accepted you before. And so that is the biggest fear of the gay closeted people. And then the other fear is the blackmail and extortion. Sometimes people will pose, they will go on social media and pose like gay people who want to go into relationships, and end up putting gay men who are in the closet in trouble with the police and extort money and blackmail them at length. So, and then if you come back and look at a gay man who is living openly gay, of course, the risk, like myself, I'm openly gay and I'm an activist. So the risk is you don't know. You don't know what's going to happen to you at any moment. You could get arrested, you could get harassed, you could get violated while just living your everyday life. So you just don't know where the risk is coming from. So the biggest fear here is persecution and prosecution if you're openly gay. That this could most likely happen to you.
What does the law say?
So at the moment, we have the law that fortunately was left behind by the British. I mean, you started by saying we have a good relationship with the British. So Uganda was one of the British colonies, and we have that relationship, friendly relationship with the British here that goes way back and still goes on up to now. But that relationship being there, at the same time, the British left behind the sodomy laws that are common in many former colonies of the British, like India, that just removed one, and then other places like in Africa. So we have the same law, and the law at the moment will criminalizes carnal knowledge against the order of nature, which would send you to jail for life, or 7 years, or 14 years. But that is only if you're caught in the act, or a sexual act, a same-sex act. And it doesn't really say same-sex act, it rather says order against nature. So anything that is not regarded as natural could be criminalized. But the law enforcers here mostly interpret this current law as, to prohibit homosexuality. And of course, our constitution as well outlaws same-sex marriage. Same-sex marriage in Uganda is totally prohibited. And then we have recently, just about 2 months ago, our parliament passed an act of parliament, which is called the Sexual Offences Bill. Right now, it is pending the signature of the president, and then it will become law. So if this becomes law, then homosexuality will be further criminalized, because there's a section that explicitly criminalizes anal sex, but also criminalizes same gender relations. So that's where we are right now.
So this law, I was going to ask that, the law that you said is pending the president's signature, that will include women, would it?
Yes. So this is very clear on criminalizing both gay men and lesbian women.
Yeah.
This law is very dangerous because it criminalizes the intent. Meaning if I go on my Facebook and say, I'm already openly gay. So if I say I'm going to meet my boyfriend, then I could be arrested for the intent of most likely committing the crime of homosexuality.
Rather than the act, as we've just been saying. So it's made it that much worse. And is it, I mean, we last year, as part of this festival, you'll know Jason Jones from Trinidad. And we had Jason interviewing Jason, and we talked at length at sort of the British legacy, basically, that it was this law criminalizing homosexuality that was left over by the British throughout the British Empire. I was put inverted commas there. Those, do you, because there's been a lot of talk, I remember over years, that somehow homosexuality was not an African issue, was un-African. Is that still being argued?
Well, it is still the big argument. And most, for example, Ugandans and many Africans, they have ignored the history that homosexuality was criminalized by the British and not Africans. And so the notion up to this day, even in Uganda, is still that homosexuality is un-African. It is Western. It is still the notion around Uganda and around Africa.
What is the likelihood of this law being passed? Because haven't over recent years, hasn't there been various attempts to try and make the law stricter against homosexuality, and it's gone before the president? Is it likely to be passed?
Well, it is 50-50.
Yeah.
I can't be so sure. It's already passed. It's pending the signature of the president. Right. So it depends on what political gain the president feels he wants out of this law. He could either sign it or not sign it. It depends. If we do a lot of work in terms of, working around lobbying the president and making sure he doesn't sign the law, and also bringing to light some of the dangers and the damage Uganda could face internationally if this law is signed, then he may not sign it. But if the conservative groups, on the other hand, whisper in his ear a lot more the benefits nationally here in Uganda for signing this law, then he might sign it. You mentioned about the criminalization of homosexuality in Uganda. Way back in 2009, a private members bill was introduced, which was commonly known around the world as Kill the Gays Bill. This bill was passed by the parliament. It was signed by the president. In fact, the president, for the first time ever in history of Uganda, he signed this bill and called a press conference when he was signing it. So that's how important and politically that LGBT rights have been, affirming our politics here locally. Yeah. So the president had the need to sign it with the media. That shows you, we can't be sure about this legislation.
What happened to that bill, Kill the Gays bill?
So we petitioned our Supreme Court, and we were able to get the bill, the law rather, nullified. It was present for 6 months. and then it was nullified and removed on a technicality, because it was argued that on the day the bill was passed in our parliament, there weren't enough members of parliament required to pass the bill. So it was squashed on no quorum. We would have been happy if it was removed on the substance of it being, contravening our international relations, our international treaties we've signed, or contravening our own constitution, being, abuse of human rights and violating minority groups, discrimination. So if it was removed on that substance, I don't think we would be having the challenges of seeing all these other new laws coming up.
Yeah, no, because I remember that, because you were one of the people who brought that case, didn't you?
Yes, I was one of the petitioners.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's so many I'd like to ask you, but at that time, was that must have really put you there in the public eye. Did that make you feel, more vulnerable to, what's happened to many LGBT people in Uganda?
Well, David, I think during that time it was a moment of survival. So I didn't pay so much attention to my own security because we were doing our best at that moment to make sure this law does not survive. But looking back, of course, definitely, I see the risks that the attention that it could have brought on myself. And of course, I've seen many of my colleagues, get violated, persecuted. One of my colleagues who used to work with me, David Kato, was murdered at his house in 2010. So it is a big risk to take, but at that moment, it was the risk I was willing to take. And I was in the moment of trying to make sure this law must be killed.
Yeah. No. I mean, I remember you doing that and how brave it was of you to do that, and you've achieved that. So the new bill that has basically come back again, has it, in this sort of shape or form that you're talking about?
Yes. So what it seems like this new bill, the parliament, the members of parliament smuggled some of the clause from the Killed Against bill into this legislation, because this is a broad sexual offences bill, which punishes a lot of sexual offences that any person in this century would want such offences punished. But then putting in punishment of two consenting adults, that doesn't make sense in this particular legislation, because it almost this law almost says that LGBT persons are sex offenders.
When go back then, 2009, in the past, there was a lot of, you were talking about, there was a lot of international pressure. I remember John Burkhoff, who was the Speaker of the House of Commons, who was also he was the president of Kaleidoscope, really sort of engaged with, I think, with parliamentarians in Uganda, trying to influence them. I know the EU did that, other countries did. You'll probably want to talk about this, but there's the balance of trying to influence, but also being seen as interfering, that there could be a backlash. How, I suppose, sitting here now, people in the UK are thinking, what can we do? What can our government do to sort of support and help you? I know it's not easy. It's not it's not simple, as I was saying, because what we could think as influence can be seen as interference.
Well, David, I would say that, I mean, I've never said this before in public, but when the law was passed in Uganda, pending the president's signature, I traveled to the UK and to the United States. When I was in the UK, I met with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, William Hague, for a very short time, and I met with other members of parliament, government officials, but the British High Commissioner then, who was in Uganda, was very good at working with the community and knowing exactly how the UK government should respond. So working with the British High Commissioner then and meeting with different UK government officials and members of parliament who were able to work out how to respond. So it was easy then. And that's why I've continuously said that the best way for the international community and governments to respond is to listen to the activists on the ground on what they say, on what you should do. For Uganda, we then had a coalition of human rights organizations, and we spoke the same language with the international partners. So it was very difficult for Uganda then to come back and say that you're forcing this on us. But then we'll tell you your own citizens who have formed the coalition of human rights organizations are saying the same thing, and we're saying the same thing. So it was easy. And I know there was a lot of work done by the UK government behind the scene with our government to try and make sure that either this law is removed or even if it is in place, that LGBT persons still remain protected.
Yeah. When was this? Was before, previously, was it?
So this was I traveled, the law was passed by parliament, and it was pending the signature of the president.
Yeah.
But looking at the political situation back then in Uganda, I was almost 90% sure that the president will sign the legislation. So I traveled to the UK, I traveled to the US, I traveled to some other countries, but then the highlight was mostly the UK and the US, because there was a lot of diplomatic engagement with my government to try and make sure that this legislation either is not passed, or if it is passed, that LGBT people are still protected.
And that was when? Was it 2009, 2000?
So the law was passed in 2013.
Right.
In December by the parliament. And it was signed by the president in February 2014. And it was removed by the Supreme Court in August 2014.
No, it is right. So obviously at the moment you're not able to travel, are you? Because of all the COVID restrictions. I mean, it's very difficult for anybody sort of getting into the UK. How are you able to engage with the UK government in the same way as you did back then?
So as you know, at the moment, first of all, times have changed. One, there's a lot of fatigue on Uganda and homosexuality, both from Ugandans, our government, and our international partners. Secondly, as I mentioned, the British High Commissioner then was very passionate about human rights and LGBT rights. And also your government, I think, was more responsive on LGBT rights then. So right now, many countries are dealing with the COVID pandemic. And so some of the issues are not center stage as they were then. And also back then, it was Killed Against Bill, an entire legislation. Now it's sexual offences bill with only a clause around criminalization of homosexuality. So the situation is a bit different from then. But that said, there is engagement. We are engaging with the British High Commission here. We've engaged with the Foreign Office, and they are aware of this legislation. We've engaged with the US embassy here in Uganda. We've engaged with the Danish embassy. We've engaged with the Swedish embassy. They are all engaging back with their capitals back home, and they are up to speed with where this legislation is. And they are working behind the scene entirely with our government to try and show the government that this particular clause, it is discriminatory and the law shouldn't be signed the way it is right now. So I am hopeful, and I trust the system with our with your diplomats here, that they are working and supporting us behind the scene.
Yeah, because I'm sure that with the Trump administration in the US, that obviously there was, it was very difficult and to get their support on these issues. And I think in the UK Parliament, perhaps our own government is not as supportive as we might like it to be. But I do know that there are very good parliamentarians in the UK, in both House of Commons and House of Lords. And you probably know many of them, Frank. People like Baroness Barker, Nick Herbert, who's now Lord Herbert. There are a number of them, I think, who would definitely be very supportive of your situation. So if you need, this is another issue, but if we ought to have a conversation about making sure that you're connected with those people, because I think that we need to sort of make sure that they're aware of this situation. I've just got a question. It's actually related to what we've been talking about, and it's says, I've worked in Uganda for a few years and met several LGBT activists who were keen to collaborate with my CSO, but they were all working on their own, weren't organised, which made it difficult for structural collaboration. What are the possibilities for organised LGBT activism in Uganda, given the necessity to remain under the radar? Because you're, Smug, maybe you could tell us a little about your organisation and how that sort of works, Frank.
So, well, that's really good. Sexual Minorities Uganda is the largest and the umbrella organization here in Uganda. We are in the city, but we collaborate and we have membership around the country. So how we work is we have organizations that then become members. And we focus so much on advocacy, which we do in the country. We also do advocacy in the region with other partners. And then we do a lot of international advocacy that involves myself and my colleagues traveling. And then we do research and documentation. We produce reports. If you go on our website, you'll see most of the reports we published. And we publish reports on the violations of LGBT persons. And then we also support our member organization. I think that is what our colleague who just asked the question is alluding to. We provide capacity to small CSOs, LGBT CSOs who are our members, in terms of leadership and movement building, which is a bit difficult given the sensitivity of how we operate here in Uganda, that many groups will be clandestine, but also the fear of exposure, but then also the fact that the visibility of the LGBT movement is growing at a very rapid state here. So almost every month you have a group coming up to support its own community or its own area or its own constituency somehow. And also we do a lot of safety and protection. In fact, that takes a lot of our time. And during now, when the COVID pandemic is affecting the LGBT community, we are faced with having to provide like relief food for the community, respond to emergencies, and also most recently when one of the LGBT shelter was raided and 44 people arrested. So under our safety and protection program, we had to respond to this very quickly. So we also have a program that is called Rights Evidence Action, which is under our safety and protection. And this program mainly works, it's a peer-to-peer program that responds to violations and documents these cases of violation, but also make sure that the person who has been violated is supported either with legal aid, medical assistance, alternate safe housing or relocation, or first aid. Whatever they need is provided right there and then, but also documenting the case. So in terms of mobilization and movement building, it is something that we're still trying to figure out, given the fact that it is very sensitive, but also the fact that the visibility of the movement is growing very fast and rapid, that groups are coming up every day. So but we're trying as much as possible to centralize and bring everyone together and try to provide some level of coordination.
You had that's really fascinating, interesting. Where does most of your sort of financial support come from, Frank?
Well, all our financial support is from outside Uganda. We don't
Right.
get any support from Uganda, so we get funding from. We're not getting any funding currently from the British. We got some bit of funding from Kaleidoscope. They host some funding, and of
Okay.
course, you know, you did mention one of our key supporters, the MP, Lord Cashman, Lord Michael Cashman, has
Oh my.
been our really very good supporter, and also in providing funding sometimes when it's needed. Yeah, and also.
One of the people that we interviewed last year. So yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah. In the pub at the festival last year, we interviewed Michael. So yeah.
Oh yes.
So,
So yeah. So yeah, we have so we have others. You know, we are supported by the Dutch. We are supported by so many LGBT foundations like to support human rights. Yeah.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, that's really great. I'm interested to sort of. You were talking about Museveni, whose re-election. During the election, do you think was there a sort of an LGBT element to the election? Because it seems the bill that you just talked about has been sort of brought in straight after that. How did that sort of come? How was the election for yourselves?
Well, I can't say that the bill had. I can't really connect the bill and the election, but what I
Okay.
can connect is LGBT rights with the election,
Mm-hmm.
because we had both politicians from the different political groups, you
Mm-hmm.
know, bringing the LGBT community on center stage. We had the ruling party, which is the NRM,
Mm-hmm.
saying that the LGBT community is supporting the opposition. And we had the opposition saying the same thing, that the LGBT community is supporting the NRM. So we were sort of put at the center. And then there were violations that happened, and a bit of riots that happened. And then we had those riots again blamed on the LGBT community, that the funders who are funding these riots are LGBT funders from abroad who are trying to cause anarchy and destabilize Uganda and all that. And definitely such kind of speech made us more vulnerable. It put us in a very difficult situation where we started receiving a lot of threats, including death threats, including several threats from different supporters of different political parties on social media as well. So it was a situation that made the LGBT community even more vulnerable.
Right. So you didn't. So is it Bobby Wine who was the sort of leading opposition candidate? You weren't getting any support from his campaign.
No, we're not getting any support from his campaign. I mean, it's a bit difficult for any politician here to support or to speak out publicly about LGBT rights, because the belief in Uganda is that majority of Ugandans do not accept LGBT persons. So politicians want numbers, and if they want numbers, they definitely will not align themselves with the LGBT community. So they have to distance themselves as much as possible. So there is totally no politician in Uganda who has supported the LGBT community.
I'm going to take you back a little bit, because you mentioned David Kato, and I'd say to any of the viewers now, if they haven't seen it, there was a very moving film that was quite a that was made in Uganda, Kumikuchu, if you remember that. Well, obviously you do, but maybe some of the viewers might. And it was around that whole sort of period. You mentioned that slightly. I mean, I think could you sort of just take us back, because I think that is, for me, it just made it really understand just how vulnerable you are as a gay person in Uganda?
Well, the film, for those who haven't seen it, I think I would highly recommend it. It is called Call Me Kuchu, and is about the Ugandan movement, the organizing, the resilience, the activism and all that. But then it highlights mostly the life of my colleague who was working with me at Sexual Minorities Uganda as our advocacy officer, and he was murdered at his house. In the film, you'll also see how LGBT persons have been outed in the newspapers and the tablets. And definitely, like I mentioned, when someone is outed here in Uganda, they will face all sorts of persecution or social exclusion. But for my colleague, after being outed on one of the newspapers that called for the hanging, because the newspaper said, hang them, they are after our children. And then
That's right.
That's when he was murdered. So some people have connected the dots and said it could have been because of this newspaper that called for the hanging of the LGBT community, that's why he was murdered.
Yeah. No, I remember seeing the front news, the newspaper with the people's faces on it and their names, and literally the film was being filmed while all this was sort of happening. It was sort of, they weren't aware of it. I think that it's like we were saying at the beginning, Frank, that you need to be, very brave in what you do. But having also seen the film there and knowing you, and you've talked about already, Ugandans are wonderful people, and also there was a lot of joy in that as well. I mean, how does the community, or how do individuals sort of, I felt there was a very strong sense of community supporting one another. Is that the case?
Yes, and I would like to say that part of the reason we are successful in pushing back and fighting these anti-legislations and the homophobia and transphobia in the country is because the community is united, especially when it comes to challenging some of the extreme measures like legislations. We come together and work together, which I think hasn't been the case for some countries. There is a need for organizing, but also in terms of working with civil society. So we come together, the LGBT community, but then we try as much as possible to get in partners of civil society to work with us, so that it's so that we're big in numbers, but also so that we can put up a very strong resilience. So yeah,
it felt like watching that film and knowing you, it felt like a family. Would that be describing?
Yes, and I wanted to add on that is majority of Ugandan LGBT community members, they come into the community for family because they are not accepted anywhere else. So they come looking for a belonging, a family. And it's true, David, that Ugandan people are very friendly in general and very welcoming. And so is the LGBT community, so friendly. When we are in our own spaces, it's just fun. And, everyone is friendly with each other. And that's why I said, when it comes to speaking up and having one voice, it is always like that. That's why we've been able to challenge these legislations that have come up.
No, fascinating. And I don't know if you saw the other night, but we had I did an interview on Saturday night with Marek Zolsz, who's a councillor for Warsaw City in Poland. And it was just, you talked there about how, the sort of accusation is that gays are coming after your children. And it's actually the very same message that is being put out in Poland, that somehow all gays are paedophiles and want to go after your children. It's a very common sort of accusation. It used to be thrown at us here in the UK. So there is that sort of that common sort of thread. how's because at the time there was a lot of influence from outside churches in Uganda. Is that still sort of happening, or is that better than it was?
Well, at the moment, it is not as bad as it was maybe 7 years ago, not long ago.
Yeah, yeah.
We had the influence of extreme American evangelicals. And in fact, these American Christians supported some of the legislations here in Uganda, including the anti-gay legislation. So my organization, we were able to sue one of the American evangelicals, that is Scott Lively.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Yes, and when we sued Scott Lively, we were able to highlight the influence these American evangelicals have had on promoting homophobia in Africa and some parts of Eastern Europe. So now they're a bit careful when they are coming to the country because they know there's someone watching. But I mean, they're still doing it, because you see in Ghana right now, Ghana has been, at the forefront in Africa of criminalizing homosexuality. And in fact, their parliament just introduced almost a similar legislation to what was introduced in Uganda back then. And that is all the influence. And behind all this legislation is extreme Christian groups.
Yeah. No, I just wondered what the situation was. I'm giving that update. Now, I've got another question coming for you. And there's actually one that I was going to ask myself, because it was historically, how was non-binary gender and sexual identities thought of in Uganda? So prior to colonialism, as we were talking about the British coming in, but so prior to colonialism, was there an acceptance of multiple gender identities in historic Ugandan communities? And I have somewhere a sort of recollection of a gay Ugandan king. Am I right, or?
I mean, I wouldn't say gay Ugandan king, but rather history and some of the information we have is that there was once a bisexual king who murdered some of his subjects because then Christians stopped them from engaging in sexual acts with him.
Right.
So, and he murdered them, and now they are referred to the Ugandan martyrs. So that history is there about, but there has been a lot of, information on that. Some people say he was only bisexual because he was young and never wanted to have children. But then there's so many, but history at least says that he was a bisexual king. Mm-hmm. In terms of sexuality, gender identity, non-binary in the past before colonialism. I mean, for example, in some of the kingdoms here, we have women who are referred to as sir or he because of their role in society. In some kingdoms, and that is widely accepted. And then we have, there were many roles where women were allowed to go into same-sexual relations because of their spiritual calling. And that was widely accepted. So the acceptance of gender non-binary persons is there in our history. Only that currently, majority of Ugandans, they dismiss all that history and they only pay attention to what the Christian evangelicals are telling them. This is an African. Yeah. For me, the simple question I've always had for Ugandans and Africans is, why do we have names that refer to homosexuality? Or why do we have definitions of homosexuality in our own languages before English, before religion was introduced in Uganda? That is enough to show you that homosexuality did exist, because you can't put a name to something that doesn't exist. You can't put a definition to something that doesn't exist.
No.
Yeah.
When somebody, you were saying in general society is not supportive of LGBT people, but when somebody knows you, does that change then? I mean, because that, again, we were talking about it with Marek in Poland. He was saying that one of the big issues for him is that when people do know somebody who is LGBT, because they have that personal connection, that it changes their perception. Does that change in Uganda? I mean, I suppose I'm thinking of families. Do families, are they more accepting or not?
Well, it is exactly the same. People, LGBT persons in the closet, are more worried about people they know finding out, because then they don't know what is going to change. What is their place going to be in society after their families and friends find out? And the majority will definitely get disowned. They will not have friends anymore. Their friends will not want to speak to them or be their friends. And their families will not want to be their families anymore. They won't want to have any attachment to them.
But
The family.
but I remember David in the film. David Cato's mother was, there was that there was a strong connection there between them, wasn't there? And
So there's a process of
yeah.
coming out. There's a process of coming out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that some people, some LGBT persons, but that's a very, 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 very small percentage that have come out families and have been accepted.
Yeah.
And that is not something that has happened overnight. That is something for many families, for many LGBT persons whose families have accepted them. It has taken a long path for them to be accepted. It just and it also depends on the relationship that one has with the family,
Mm-hmm.
and how one has come out, how one has presented themselves to the family on the process of coming out, and how one has been able to take through the family the process even before coming out. So it's not easy. It is it's a unique situation for every individual. But what I can say that relates to many situations that relate is being disowned soon as you're even coming out. But many Ugandans don't come out. Many Ugandans are exposed or outed.
Mm. And that, hence why you were saying that that there is this sense of community, sense of family amongst the LGBT community, because they, as you said, they're often disowned by their own family and need to have some sort of, connection.
Yes.
In regards to that, how has that been really difficult during COVID? I mean, I don't know if you know about in the UK, but we've literally been, isolated for months from other people for the last 18 months. I mean, it's better. We've had it's opening up, and we had periods through last summer it was opened up, but certainly through myself, for instance, from about December through till March, I wasn't allowed to have anybody in my house. I saw a few people around my village. I haven't seen my brother, for instance, for a year and a half. We've had all this sort of social restriction. You can only go in wearing masks, but even going into the shops, etc., traveling, there was a lot of restrictions. How's that been in Uganda?
Well, right now we are on a 42 days lockdown, total lockdown, and I think now it's 3 weeks, so 3 more weeks to go. And for the LGBT community, it has been difficult. Like I mentioned, the community is a home. And when the pandemic happened, no one knew how to deal with it. Like, no one knew what to do. And so some LGBT persons, moved into shelters. And in fact, right away, one of the shelters was raided by the police and people were arrested. So the LGBT community, what we're seeing right now in Uganda, there's a lot of trauma, a lot of psychosocial needs, and a lot of mental health. because many LGBT persons have been forced to go back and stay with families that don't accept them.
Right.
And if you're staying at home, you have to conform to what your family believes you should look like. If you're a transgender person, then you have to dress up the way they want you to dress up. The way, so that is causing a lot of mental health issues. But also, if you, and like I said, majority of LGBT persons are not open. So when they come to the community, they are open in the community. And sometimes when they go back home, they are not open to their families. And so if someone goes back home, it means they can't even speak on the phone or meet their partner, because then they will be suspected or they will be outed. So this is causing a lot of mental health within the LGBT community. But also in terms of living, majority of LGBT persons are not employed or underemployed. So we've seen many people have lost a lot of jobs, and also many offices. Some offices here have been turned into homes where LGBT persons can stay. And now we're trying to provide a lot of food in terms of relief to majority of the LGBT community members who can't go home.
Yeah, no. It sounds like a very difficult situation for you there. I just want to come back, because where we are here in Northern Devon. It isn't London, so it's quite we're about 4 or 5 hours away from London, and it is quite an area fairly socially conservative. We held our first Pride parade through Barnstable, through the streets of Barnstable. I think it was like 2 years ago now, before the pandemic and everything. 6 years ago, when I first joined the organisation, people had said to me, "Oh, we can't have a Pride parade through Barnstable. We have to. All people would be throwing things at us and everything." In the period over what we were doing and working with the community, we did hold the Pride parade. I mean, it was a wonderful event with a rainbow flag through the centre of the town, with all the local mayors of the towns from around wearing their chains of office. There were thousands of people out on the streets, cheering. It was really quite. It was a wonderful day. How have you been able to celebrate Pride in Uganda? In such a way, because I seem to recall there having been prides in Uganda, but I'm just trying to work out how you did it.
Well, we haven't celebrated Pride in Uganda the way you would imagine the Pride you just described to me right now, or the way you see Pride parades in London and other places in the developed countries. We have been able, however, to celebrate Pride here in our own way, because we celebrate Pride in a secluded area, because you wouldn't imagine if we went out on the streets, even if we don't get arrested, we'd get lynched by the public.
Yeah.
Because homosexuality is widely not accepted here in Uganda. Yeah. So we've celebrated Pride in an excluded area. The first time before the celebrations could end, we were raided by the police and we got arrested, detained for a very short time, and then let go, all of us. The second time, we did manage to hold Pride for a whole week. And I think the third time as well. The last time we held Pride in Uganda was in 2016, when we were raided by the police, violently arrested. In fact, I was arrested and put in a police jail, tortured by the inmates, forced to take off my clothes and bathe this very, very dirty water under a lot of derogatory behavior in the prison cell with the inmates. Some of my colleagues, transgender women, their hair was cut off. People were undressed. Someone almost lost their life when they were running away from the police. They jumped off a building. So it was extremely dangerous. And after that moment, we decided not to hold Pride until we find a way of making sure that people who are coming for the parade are not at a huge risk.
Yeah. No, I mean, it sounds like everything that you do, you just have to be so, so careful of the people that you engage with, and the responsibility, because you move slightly forward, and then things like that happen. And I think it just hearing what you were describing there, it just brings it home to people listening to this, just how difficult, how dangerous it is just being yourself in Uganda. I think I'm just checking here because I got a message from Sarah. Sarah's put a message up there. She's saying to everybody, thank you for attending the event. You can complete a short survey afterwards. It takes no longer than 5 minutes, but and ways that you can sort of engage with our community and with Sunrise. But look, I mean, I'm just wondering if there's any other questions from other people. But I feel that this has been a really fascinating and insightful discussion, Frank. I mean, we've known one another, I said, for a number of years, but what you just told me there, I wasn't aware that that's what had happened at the Pride event. I knew that things had sort of died down. You have to sort of be a bit more careful, but not to that extent. So it just sort of drives it home, just to people listening to this, just how, in Uganda, a country which, through the Commonwealth we have links with just how challenging it is to be yourself, to your sexuality. I mean, it's Tanya's here as one of our people who works in the organisation with charity, has asked, what can we do? Can we write to Ugandan officials, our MPs? I mean, I suppose, what can individuals do who are sitting listening to this, Frank?
Well, thank you. I mean, there's so many. I think one of engaging your MPs is one of the areas which is really important, because for us, creating awareness about what is happening is very important. And then secondly, I mean, David, we've been friends for a very long time. You stay in touch with me, and then because situations keep changing. So right now, the law is with the president. If the president says the law maybe will need more support from you, then we can change strategy. But another strategy is to stay in touch with the activists on the ground. They can always give you the direction of what to do next. And then solidarity is very important. In any solidarity groups that you have, keep raising and creating awareness about Uganda, because then that is how we create a ripple of effect of what is happening, and people get to know about the situation. But for now, I think the issue of writing or informing your MP about the situation is good.
Well,
and engage with maybe the Foreign Office and the Ugandan embassy here, and then it gets on their radar. They get to
well, I'm a governor of my local college here, Petrock College, and I'm sure that students and Sunrise together after this will have a little bit of think, because there might be a way that we can do, like you were saying, trying to keep this connection between yourselves in Uganda and us in this little rural community in northern Devon and Cornwall as well, because I think we probably have some. Cornwall is the very southwest part of England, but actually they have a great sort of pride network. They're really making strides forward, and as we are in our area here, and I'm sure that in some ways as well that they would want to be connected with you. So maybe we can have, Frank, we can sort of have a bit of a discussion and see how we might be able to do this. And I'm hoping, and I've said, I really want to come and visit, be able to see the country. But
it's a very beautiful country.
No, I know, and as I said, I mean, I've always found the people like yourself really warm and welcoming, and would like to be able to do that. I think that probably, unless you've got anything else to say yourself, but I think that that brings us to the end of our discussion. I want to say, look, thank you so much for doing this and being part of our festival here. Yeah, and Sarah, who's our chief executive, has also said the same. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. No, I think that hopefully we can build something out of this, because I think it's really important, as you were saying, that those connections that to make you know that we're here as well, how we might be able to help. So,
yes,
brilliant.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Take care.